All right, we are in Deuteronomy, and we left off partway through chapter 16. And this is one instance where a chapter division probably should have occurred. There it didn't, is in 16 and verse 18. And just to kind of keep us in mind of where we are in the broader context of the book, we're still talking about the specific stipulations of the covenant. I wonder how that would turn out as a tongue twister. Here in chapter 16 and verse 18 through the end of chapter 18, what we have is a discussion on various leadership offices in Israel. And so everything from 1618 to 1822 is a large block of laws devoted to these leadership offices. And there are 4 offices detailed here. There's the judges, there's the kings, there's the priests, and there's the prophets. Some people who are trying to get these specific stipulations to line up with the 10 Commandments will say, well, this lines up with is all extrapolated from the 5th commandment, honor your father and mother. There's this basic principle of respect for authority, and now that extends to human authorities besides parent. Well, maybe, I don't know. You can decide that for yourself. I'm not going to push dogmatically for that idea. What I do want to talk about is how all of these offices are fulfilled by Jesus. Jesus is the judge, He is the king, He is the priest, He is the prophet. That is what we're going to kind of see as we go throughout. So it's interesting that all these laws are grouped together in this way. Beginning in verse 18 of chapter 16, "You shall appoint for yourselves judges and officers in all your towns which the Lord your God is giving you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not distort justice, you shall not be partial, you shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. Justice, and only justice, you shall pursue, that you may live and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not plant for yourself an asherah of any kind of tree beside the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make for yourself. You shall not set up for yourself a sacred pillar, which the Lord your God hates. You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep, which has a blemish or any defect, for that is a detestable thing to the Lord your God. If there is found in your midst, in any of your towns which the Lord your God is giving you, a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God by transgressing His covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun, or the moon, or any of the heavenly host which I have not commanded, and if it is told you, and you have heard of it, then you shall inquire thoroughly. Behold, if it is true and the thing certain that this detestable thing has been done in Israel, you shall bring out that man or that woman who has done this evil deed to your gates, that is the man or the woman, you shall stone them to death. On the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, he who is to die shall be put to death. He shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. The hand of the witnesses shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. If any case is too difficult for you to decide between one kind of homicide or another, between one kind of lawsuit or another, and between one kind of assault or another, being cases of dispute in your courts, you shall arise and go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. So you shall come to the Levitical priest or the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall inquire of them, and they will declare to you the verdict in the case. You shall do according to the terms of the verdict which they declare to you from that place which the Lord chooses. And you shall be careful to observe according to all that they teach you to do. According to the terms of the law which they teach you, and according to the verdict which they tell you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the word which they declare to you, to the right or to the left. The man who acts presumptuously by not listening to the priest who stands there to serve the Lord your God, nor to the judge, that man shall die, and thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. Then all the people will hear and be afraid, and will not act presumptuously again." All right, then that's kind of lengthy, and you'll notice that there was actually a point in the discussion of the judges where it kind of goes off on a tangent. We'll talk about that. But what was the point of the judges? Why are they there? What was their main function? Jenna? To judge. What does that mean? Yes, to settle disputes. That's basically what we're talking about here. And does that mean that, two people come in who have an argument and they just arbitrarily decide, you're right, you're wrong, have a nice day? Is that what they do?
There has to be at least 3 people involved.
Okay.
Maybe 4.
All right. How do they make these decisions? How do they determine what is justice? Based on what the law says, right. What are we reading? And, there's probably a good chance that these specific stipulations that are here in the law of Moses are, at least in some sense, designed as guidelines for the judges to follow. You're going to resolve a dispute, you go back to the law. You examine that, and you make a decision based on that. You don't just make a decision based on what you like or what you feel should be done, or whether or not you like one person better than the other. You make a decision based on the justice that is detailed in the laws and how God defines justice. Not how you define justice, how God defines it. Don. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, yeah.
Nowadays, as time has gone on,
yeah.
go further into the time
There,
that the children of Israel
okay. I have a lot of things I could say about that, but I don't want to push my political opinions from here. So, about how our judicial system should function. What we see here is, the main function of a judge is to make sure that justice is done, and make sure that people aren't, in other words, that the wicked are not just getting away with doing wicked things, and the righteous aren't suffering for things that, they didn't do. You saw this back in chapter 1 even. Moses appointed judges for the purpose of making decisions in Israel. Now, usually, who were the judges? How did you get to be a judge in Israel? Who's usually in that position? Point of yourselves, judges. You just appoint anybody, willy-nilly. We're going to form a judging community, and I get to appoint myself as a judge. Is that what I do?
Someone with righteous judgment.
Someone with righteous judgment? No, and presumably the people who are the judges are people who are the elders of any given city, is the idea. And that's where this idea comes of taking people out to the gate. Later on in Deuteronomy, we have a talk about taking people out to the gate to the elders of the city. Now, you don't just appoint anybody as an elder. An elder is not just an old person, because there's a lot of old people out there who aren't very discerning or very thoughtful in their approach to things. If you spend your whole life being foolish, you're probably going to grow up to be a foolish old person. That's just a fact. But what we have here is we're talking about, and you back up, and Exodus has a similar principle given. Well, actually, no, let's stick it to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 1. Talks about people who Moses appoints. Choose wise and discerning and experienced men from your tribes, and I will appoint them as your heads. Deuteronomy 1:13. And that's the idea. In Exodus 18 and verse 21, we have the same concept put forth. Jethro talks about them here, but God is approving of this scenario, obviously. You shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over you as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Jenna. Well, yeah, the Proverbs 31 woman, her husband is respected in the gates. The idea is that he would be one of the elders of the city. In the ancient culture, people who were the elders of a given city would sit in the gates. They would teach the people from there, and they would also render decisions and disputes that might have arisen between the citizens of that particular town. Later on, we're going to see this as we go throughout Deuteronomy, but the elders of a city were responsible for dealing with the issues coming up in cities of refuge. The elders of the city were the people who had to deal with the problem of just a dead body that gets found in the field. They're the ones who have to deal with that too.
So Proverbs 31 is not really talking about it.
No, probably not. Interesting that comes up. Have to think about that. That Proverbs 31. I mean, you think about Job. Job was likely an elder in his city. And the whole book of Job As I take it, the whole book of Job, people want to say it's about the problem of suffering, but really Job doesn't really answer the problem of suffering. God never tells Job why he was suffering. He just basically tells him there's a lot of stuff you don't know and you need to deal with it. One of probably the other principal things that Job is really about is about wisdom and where it really comes from. But Job talks about in chapter 29 how his own experiences were like this. He says, when I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square, the young men saw me and hid themselves. The old men arose and stood. The princes stopped talking and put their hands on their mouths. The voices of the nobles was hushed. Their tongues stuck to their palate. For when the ear heard it, it called me blessed. And when the eye saw it, it gave witness of me, because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the orphan who had no helper. That's in Job 29, verses 7 through 12. And he goes on and on describing what he does in the gates. How the people, when Job comes to the gates to talk, everybody stops. Everybody listens to him because he's wise, because he's one of the elders of the city. He talks about how he himself delivers the orphan and the widow. That's part of his job as a elder or judge of that city, was to settle disputes that might have resulted in injustice. But the main principle that judges are supposed to follow is what? The law. Well, judge with righteous judgment. Verse 18. Yes. And Jesus actually quotes that in John chapter 7 and verse 24. Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Kind of interesting that comes up. This is Jesus, who everybody always quotes and says, well, Jesus said don't judge. But go back and look at the context of that statement, and what Jesus is really talking about is consistency in one's own judgments. Because everybody, you won't find a person out there who doesn't judge. They don't exist. Anytime you call somebody judgmental, you yourself have made a judgment call. It's just a fact. It's one of those ironies of hypocrisy. Furthermore, when you call someone judgmental, you're actually violating what Jesus is really saying there, because he's warning against hypocrisy. That's a freebie for what it's worth. Jenna, do you have something?
No, I was thinking more like justice.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's the principle of justice. You look at the need for justice throughout. Verse 18, judge with righteous judgment. Verse 19, do not distort justice. Verse 20, pursue justice. And justice you shall pursue. My version has it, justice and only justice. Try to make it more emphatic. And the idea is the same here. The goal of any law, of any government, of any official is the pursuit of justice. The twofold act of punishing the wicked and rewarding the righteous. 1 Peter chapter 2, and verses 13 to 14, talks about how God places kings in authority for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. I quoted that in one of my entrance exams type things. It asked me, the question was something about what is the purpose of government. I said, well, the Bible gives a very nice definition of that, doesn't it? The point of government, when it's all said and done, is the praise of the praise of those who do right and the punishment of evildoers. Don't get those two confused. That's kind of backwards. That's the point, is the pursuit of justice. People who do bad things must be punished, and people who do good things must be praised. In Romans 13, Paul talks about how the Roman government bears the right of the sword, the right to exact capital punishment. That is a God-given right that God has given them. That sounds redundant. What is important about verse 19? Verse 19, you shall not distort justice, you shall not be partial, you shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. Have we seen that idea anywhere before? Chapter 1 and chapter 10, but who is it talking about? It's talking about God. God is the one who does not show partiality. God is the one who does not take a bribe. God is the one who ultimately is the true arbiter of justice. And so God is the one who is the judge of all the earth. And at the very end, God is the one who will render to all according to what they deserve. At the end of the day, God is going to come and justice will finally be done. You ever seen court cases go through and you're like, well, justice wasn't done there. Maybe somebody who committed a crime got off. They got away with it. Maybe somebody who didn't commit a crime got punished and went to prison. That happens all the time. Justice gets upset in the system, and we tend to focus on the exceptions rather than the rules, but they're there. Well, what do we do about that? Is there any hope for that situation? There was it was like the Casey Anthony trial. My wife asked me what I thought of that after she got off, and I said, well, she only gets off temporarily if she's guilty. I mean, it's like, if I rob the 7-Eleven and I get, half a block down the road before they catch me and throw me in jail, did I get away with it? Well, I got away with it for half a block. That's what we're really looking at here, is that from the perspective of eternity, nobody really gets away with anything. God is the true judge. God is the highest court. And any bad decisions that are made in any lower human courts, even in the U.S. Supreme Court, will be overturned in the final day of judgment. That is the reassurance and that is the hope that we have, is that justice will finally be done as people. And so that's really the idea here. God is the true judge. He does not show partiality, and nobody can bribe him. Think about it. How would you bribe God? Oh, I'm going to give you all my money. Where'd you get it? Where did you get that? Can God do anything with your money? Does He need that? Well, I'll offer a bunch of sacrifices. Well, every cattle on the earth already belongs to the Lord, so that doesn't really work very well. And there's a whole host of other things. People can't bribe God. That is why He is the ultimate judge. He's the ultimate arbiter. He cannot be bought. He cannot be bargained with. He cannot be, disputed with, because He is always, always right. Done. Well, yeah, exactly. Right. Right. Verses 21 through 17, verse 1, talk about idolatry and defective sacrifices, and yet another. Well, God didn't put the chapter divisions there, so there's a bad chapter division. Why is this just interjected into a discussion about judges? What's this got to do with anything? It's talking about.
Feel they're unfairly treated.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's definitely. I hadn't thought of it that way, actually. But there's definitely a tendency of people who, they feel like they've been wronged by the system. They're going to have less respect for it. Obviously, that's one way. I mean, the other thing, this is probably more of a for instance list of things. It's not because he's not going to recite the whole law for them again of 3 verses. But what we have here is really kind of a danger of this religious syncretism. Don't put your Asherah next to the altar of the Lord. Don't try to mix your religions together, and don't try to cheat on the sacrifices either. It's like Malachi talks about. You're offering the blind and the lame for sacrifice. You're really robbing it. You know that, right? It's not a subject change because verse 2 explains it. Verse 2 describes if anybody is found doing these things, this is the procedure or the process that needs to take place. And these are just, for instance, ways of transgressing the covenant. And whenever somebody breaks these laws, who's going to step in and investigate the matter? The judges, right? Exactly. And and what procedure must they use? Righteousness. Okay, all right. Specifics. What must they do if they find out somebody's doing these idolatrous acts? Stone them. I heard a rumor that brother so and so over here is committing idolatry. Let's take him out and stone him. Is there anything got to go on between that first?
Well, yeah.
Huh? They have to what?
They have to make inquiry.
They have to make inquiry. Okay, so you can't just, take the rumor's word for it. You actually have to go investigate the matter. Okay, all right. Jenna? There have to be at least 2 or 3 witnesses. If you're going, and it's specified in verse 6 that on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses he who is be put to death. You don't exact capital punishment if there's only one witness. Because if there's only one witness, that means it's just one guy's word against another. Now, if the guy confesses to the crime, you don't need witnesses at all. That's just a given throughout. But if it's one guy's word against another, well, you need a second guy or a third guy to help offset that. Jen?
Why would anybody do this in front of more than one person?
Well, there's a good question right there. Why would you commit a crime? All I got to do is commit all my crimes in front of one person and I can get away with everything. Well, you don't really get away with it, like I said. If it boils down to one person's word against another, God is the one that sorts that out at the end. But we as humans are incapable of making that decision because we don't know. We weren't there. There's a problem. And so there are times, this is one of those instances where the law, sometimes we'll find things in the law that are good, sometimes we'll find things in the law that are ultimately imperfections of sorts. And this is one of those imperfections in the law. Yeah, there's a limitation on what the law can do. You'll find little imperfections like this all throughout. Ultimately, those imperfections are resolved by the judge, the prophet, the priest, the king, Jesus Christ. That's Jesus is the one who comes and fixes all of those things. For instance, 2 or 3 eyewitnesses are necessary. And 2 or 3 witnesses, do you see that principle anywhere else in the Bible, by the way? You see that that's all over the New Testament, isn't it? Matthew 18. The whole process of church discipline demands 2 or 3 eyewitnesses to what happened. If your brother sins, go show him his fault in private. And if he repents, you've won your brother. But if not, you got to take 2 or 3 witnesses. And that's not just 2 or 3 people you like that agree with you. Those are 2 or 3 people that saw it happen. And they've got to reason with him too. And they've got to appeal to him. And because Jesus even quotes this passage in Deuteronomy saying, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact must be confirmed. And if they don't listen to him, then you bring it before the congregation. If they don't listen to the congregation, then they must be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. That's in Matthew chapter 18. 2 Corinthians 13:1, Paul quotes the same passage when he talks about how this is my 3rd visit to Corinth. Every fact is to be established by 2 or 3 witnesses. Each visit he makes is one more witness to the way that they behave. 1 Timothy 5:19, do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now that's not negating what Matthew 18 says. That's not a magic rule for elders. If you see an elder commit a sin, you can go show him his fault in private. But if you're going to receive an accusation against an elder, you need 2 or 3 witnesses. Don't believe everything you hear just from one guy's hearsay. Jenna?
Would it not counted as witnesses?
Well, that has to do more. That's not really a thing with the law. That's more.
What's the question?
The question was, whether or not we talked about when we were discussing evidences about how women would not have been considered credible witnesses in the resurrection. Now that's not really a law thing. That's more of a culture thing. They just didn't think women were credible. There's nothing in the law that says that women are not admissible as witnesses. There's nothing in the law that places any kind of limitation on who the eyewitness can be. That's something. The fact that women were the early witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus is considered self-damaging evidence because, the ancient people didn't think they were credible. They thought they were gullible or something like that. And so the fact that the New Testament uses them means that they're less likely to be making the story up. Because if you were going to make it up, who would you pick to be your first eyewitnesses?
What if your witnesses are 2 5-year-olds?
2 5-year-olds? There's a good question, And I don't have answers to a lot of these what-if questions. If you want answers to what-if questions, the Jewish rabbis have debated endlessly all of these things in the law about, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? What if a guy is carrying half a dried fig on the Sabbath? What if a guy is carrying 2 halves of a dried fig on the Sabbath? Cut them in 2. There's a long tractates in the rabbinic literature about this kind of stuff, and I don't have the answers to that. That's just what we're kind of stuck on here. I would think that, you do have to be able to demonstrate that the witnesses are telling the truth and just not making stuff up as they go. Now, if you can establish that a witness isn't credible, then they're not credible. The one thing you notice is that the witnesses are required to throw the first stones. which now there's a psychological deterrent involved. If you're really going to accuse this guy, you've got to be willing to carry out the sentence. You've got to be willing to participate in that. And if you're now, here's another interesting question: what happens if you're caught making a false accusation? So if I accuse my brother of some crime, and if everybody finds out that I'm lying, they're going to do to me whatever they were going to do to him. That's the principle that's in the law. And that I think is actually probably be a good idea for our justice system. But in Deuteronomy 19 and verses 15 through 21, a single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he's committed. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. If a malicious witness rises up against a man to accuse him of wrongdoing, then both the men who had the dispute shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who will be in office in those days. The judges shall investigate thoroughly, and if the witness is a false witness, and he has accused his brother falsely, you shall do to him just as he had intended to do to his brother. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. The rest will hear and be afraid, and will never again do such an evil thing among you. Thus you shall not show pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. That would apply to, he applies it specifically to capital punishment here, but it would probably apply to minor disputes too. If I'm going to sue a guy for $1,000 for something he didn't do, well, when it's over, he should have to pay me $1,000, is what the law says. I said that backwards. If I'm found to be lying, I should have to pay him $1,000 because I accused him of something that he didn't do. I was trying to rob him, and so it is in essence as if I robbed him. Exactly, the first... Done. Sons of Belial, yes. Well, yeah, and 1 Kings 21 describes the story of Naboth, and that story is, alluding to these passages in Deuteronomy, and there's a definite upsetting of the whole justice system there, because they get false witnesses in, they get worthless elders in the city, they're probably taking bribes, because I bet Jezebel paid them off.
But it's obvious that the part about thoroughly never happened.
Right, exactly. They never thoroughly investigate. And there's clearly an agenda on the part of the king. He wants Naboth's vineyard, so Naboth's got to go. Yeah, they did. Well, they got a bunch of false witnesses for Jesus' trial, and they can't even all agree in their testimony. So Jesus has to provide the testimony for them by claiming he's the Son of God, and which is it really blasphemy if it's true? They take it as blasphemy. They say, well, you've heard, and Caiaphas cites the procedure, we don't need witnesses, you've heard the words from his mouth. But there in that instance, there's just, what, Jen? But not even in that matter was their testimony consistent, right? And so, now, the fact that the guy is stoned, again, symbolizes the community's repudiation of the sin. We've talked about that before. Now, if local judges can't make a decision, what happens? Well, you appeal to a higher court. And, the higher court is the priest or the judge who was in office in those days. There's an emphasis, once again, on the place which your God chooses. Now for us, the ultimate place which God chooses is heaven, so the only higher judge we can appeal to is God himself, who settles all disputes at the end. And the Bible mentions higher courts at the temple in other places. 2 Chronicles 19 comes to mind, where Jehoshaphat appoints judges over the land who are to be righteous and judge righteously. And the verdict of the priest is law. And if you contend with the priest, what happens? Well, you die. It's like Hosea said, your people are like those who contend with the priest, Hosea chapter 4. And failure to comply with the judicial decision was an evil that had to be purged, because it means there's a lack of respect for authority among the people that needs to be driven out, inspires fear in the rest of the nations. But ultimately, the priests were capable of being wrong too. The priests were capable of being corrupted, which is why the system is not infallible. The highest court is the judgment from the throne of heaven, sanctuary. And in that place, all disputes will be settled once and for all, and all wrong verdicts will be permanently overturned. Any comments or questions up through talking about judges? We talked about judges for almost the whole class. Yeah, Jenna.
I'm trying to remember, doesn't
Yeah, Paul insults the high priest on one occasion. God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall, and they kind of chide him for that. You say, well, you shall. He's like, you revile God's high priest. And Paul says, I didn't know he was the high priest. The law says you don't speak evil of a ruler of your people. And there's two interpretations of that. One is that Paul is being sarcastic, and the other is that Paul couldn't see him or didn't know genuinely didn't know. And I don't know what I think about that passage. So that's where we're at on that. But that's in Acts 23 or something? I don't know. All right. We're not going to have time to talk about kings, so I'm just going to read the passage for you and we'll close. Verses 14 through 20. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations who are around me. You shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way. He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. It shall come about, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. It shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or the left, so that he and his sons may continue long in the kingdom in the midst of Israel. It's important for the king to know their Bible, isn't it? We'll conclude on that note, and we will resume next time and talk more about what the law says about having a king.